First, let's go over the answers. So, label each word in the following sentence by its part of speech. Start with verbs. I, it, we, blank. I was. So, was is a verb, and it's the only one there. So, move on to nouns and pronouns. Start with the one that's doing the word was, and you have scar. Scar is a noun. And find other objects, things in this sentence, other nouns, and you have what? Nighttime is an idea, that's a noun, and that's it. So you move on to adjectives and you say, what kind of noun or pronoun? What kind of nighttime? Nothing. What kind of scar? It's an old scar, so old is an adjective. It's the scar, so the is an adjective. What else? Yes, it's a painful scar, so painful is an adjective. Okay, then that's it. So you move on to adverbs. Adverbs tell you how other parts of speech do their jobs. They tell you how verbs do their jobs. So how was it? Nothing. Really was painful? No, nothing. So we move on to adjectives. How old, how painful, and you get excruciatingly. So excruciatingly is an adverb. And you say how excruciatingly, nothing there, so that's the only adverb. And we move on to prepositions. So things that would show the position of the pencil and the desk, and you get at. The pencil goes at the desk, so at is a preposition. So to review there, that's adjective, noun, verb, adverb, adjective, preposition, noun. Okay? And the subject of this sentence, by the way, is scar. Okay. Number 3, identify the subject and the main verb in the following sentence. So, standing in 2 feet of snow, Greg felt the cold reach all the way to his bones. First, you go through and you find verbs. And what do you find? Well, you can't standing. You can stand, but you can't standing. Standing is gerund. So that's not a verb. What else? Felt. I felt? I felt, yes. What else? Reach. Reach is also a verb. Okay. And if you got rid of your prepositional phrases, you'd still be left with pretty significant sentence. You'd get rid of in 2 feet of snow, and you'd get rid of to his bones, and you'd have standing. Greg felt the cold. Reach all the way. Okay. And so you'd say, well, is the subject cold or is it Greg? Well, what we were talking about with subjects and objects, remember with the pen, if I hit the pen is the object that I hit. Well, what is the object in this little sentence here? It's going to be the cold. Now it's strange because the cold is still doing a verb here. The cold is reaching. And if you got all your parts of speech here and you put cold as the subject, I'll probably give it to you. But because cold is an object, not the subject, what I'm hoping for is felt for the verb and subject, Greg. On we go. Identify each of the bolded words and phrases as an independent clause, a dependent clause, or a prepositional phrase. Okay, so for either independent clause or dependent clause, you need a subject and a verb. And this has one, I walk. Okay, it makes sense by itself. I walk into the classroom. And is this one of the I will beista words? Yes, it is. So this is a dependent clause. For this one, she went to the advanced section of the library. Now this contains prepositional phrases, but it's also a complete sentence. For these ones, if it's a prepositional phrase, it will not be a complete sentence. So you got a verb, you got a subject, makes sense by itself. This is an independent clause. Okay. 6 through 8. Label each sentence as one of the following: an IC-DC, a DC, comma, IC, an IC, comma, coordinating conjunction IC, or an IC, semicolon, IC. Okay. Now, for these ones, just kind of go through until you get to the end of a complete sentence. So, she never stepped. That's a complete sentence. And there's this prepositional phrase that goes with it. She never stepped outside of her house after 9 p.m. in winter. Okay, bunch of prepositional phrases, but this is just one complete sentence. But she stayed out all night in the summer. Okay, there's a complete sentence. So you have an IC, comma, but IC, which is this. IC, comma, coordinating conjunction IC. All right? Then number 7. Go until you get to the end of a sentence. There were thousands of minuscule bits of confetti on the floor. That's a complete sentence. Again, you could stop right here. There were thousands. That would be a complete sentence. Then these are all prepositional phrases. When the New Year's Eve party was over. That's a complete sentence. All right, so up here, this conjunction was coordinating, fanboys. But the word when is on the list of woo bista, so it's a subordinating conjunction. That means this is an IC, DC. Okay, now this one is tricky, and I'll probably give it to you if you put DC, comma, IC or IC, DC, because you never try to climb Mount Everest. That's a complete sentence. You will never know. That's a complete sentence. You can do it. That's a complete sentence. So you have DC, because this if is a subordinating conjunction, comma, IC, because that's a complete sentence, DC, because that's a subordinating conjunction, and that's a complete sentence. What I'm going for here is DC, comma, IC. That's more obvious because you've got the comma, but really it does both. And I'm going to talk about what's going on here in just a second, but let's do 9 and 10 real quick. Write 2 grammatically correct sentences, each containing a dependent clause, one in which the dependent clause comes first, and one in which the dependent clause comes second. So just something simple, like the examples we used when we were talking about this last time. I eat when I am hungry, period. And you'll get credit as long as you don't have a comma there. And then when I am hungry, comma, I eat. And you'll get credit for that one as long as you do have a comma there. That's what I'm looking for. Okay, now, what I want to talk about briefly is what's going on here. So we talked about the ways you can combine clauses, and this was basically all I gave you. IC-DC, DC, comma, IC, IC, comma, coordinating conjunction IC, and sometimes IC, semicolon IC. But, you know, most of the sentences you see in the newspaper are just, well, anywhere. They're a lot more complex than this. You'll have many, many, many clauses stuck together. So that is all to say, consider these as ways to chain clauses rather than forms of sentences. So with this one, you have DC, comma, IC, and that's a complete sentence. And then they sort of fuse and become a new IC, and you can link it to this dependent clause. And let me show you how you could do that at great length. So let's have a sentence. I eat. Okay, so that's an independent clause. Now let's put a DC on it. When I am hungry. Okay, now it's an IC-DC. Now those are going to fuse and become a new IC. I eat when I am hungry if the food is good. All right, so now I have this Franken IC and another DC, they've fused. And I can keep doing this. I eat when I am hungry if the food is good, whether I want to or not. Okay? So this, again, Franken IC, DC. And they fuse. And now I got a big old IC again. Now, I can take this one and I can add more dependent clauses or prepositional phrases to the beginning too. Because I have a problem, comma, I eat when I am hungry, if the food is good, whether I want to or not. Okay? And they fuse. Okay? Now, let's keep going. Let's add a dependent clause to the beginning of this. Since I was a boy, comma, because I have a problem, I eat when I'm hungry, if the food is good, whether I want to or not. And once again, they fuse and become a new IC. And I can do this forever. Now, this sentence is terrible, of course. I mean, it wanders around and it's confusing. It's a terribly written sentence, but it's grammatically perfect. There's no problem with this. This sentence is not a run-on. It's a poorly written sentence, but a run-on is when you combine two or more independent clauses incorrectly. Okay? But this is not that. It's just ugly. Now, you got to be careful with these because what do you have here at the beginning? You have a DC, comma, DC. Well, you can't have a DC, comma, DC. That's not on the list. But you can if all of these things are fused together in order. So it can get confusing, but as long as in this entire sentence you never have an IC, comma, IC, then you're okay, right? So what I mean by this is, if I go to the end here and I have a comma, I'm going to get rid of the underline there. So I have this whole sentence. Since I was a little boy, because I have a problem, I eat when I am hungry if the food is good, whether I want to or not, comma, I have a serious problem. Okay, now it's a run-on. Because this whole thing was a complete sentence, and now I have another complete sentence. They're joined by a comma, and now it becomes, I mean, up to this point, it was weird, but it made sense. But when I add this one, now there's confusion. Now there's grammatical confusion because, oh, wait a minute. Is it I have a serious problem because I have this issue where I eat food no matter what? Or is it that whether or not I want to have this problem, I have it? And then, this other thing was describing the problem. So is the whether or not applying to eating food when I'm hungry? Or is it applying to having a serious problem? Now I don't know because I've created a run-on. So I would need to change this to a semicolon or to a so or something. And now grammatically, it's correct. Although it's still quite terrible. Okay. Now, let's get rid of this ugly thing and go on to the main course. So we talked about the purpose of all this. That is, first, you learned parts of speech so that you could identify the subject and verb, so that you could identify clauses, so that you could combine clauses, and all of that is so that you can identify, fix, and write without using run-ons and fragments. That's the point of all this. Okay. So, what will this look like on quizzes in the future? It will look like this. I'll give you a run-on, or not always a run-on. Sometimes I'll give you something that seems like a run-on but is not. So I'll give you something like, I eat, comma, it is good. And I'll introduce the question by saying something like, consider the following sentence. If it is a run-on, correct it in 3 different ways using each of the methods discussed in class. It will be something like that. And whenever I do this methods discussed in class, I will be referring to what we talked about last time and what we're talking about today. And that is, the 3 methods are: 1, turn it into 2 complete sentences. So, I eat, period, capital I, it is good, period. Okay? 2, I see, comma, fanboys, I see, period. So, I eat, comma, and it is good, period. And then ICDC or DC, comma, IC. So I eat when it is good, or when it is good, comma, I eat. Because there will be some sentences where it's difficult to combine in either IC-DC form or DC, comma, IC form, so we're going to consider these the same thing. And we'll have lots of these quizzes, so I'll see both options from you many times. Now, I used to do this as 4 different ways using each of the methods discussed in class. So the 4th one was IC, semicolon, IC. I eat, semicolon, it is good. And I do need you to know that this is correct and this is an option, but I don't really want you to get in the habit of writing semicolons all the time because they're not necessary. And they create problems. So we'll just set this one aside. These are the ones that I'm looking for. Okay, now sometimes I will add something like this. If it is not a run-on, write NA for not applicable. And then I'll have something that's like, I eat because it is good. And so I'll expect you to identify that, oh no, that's correct. That a run-on is 2 complete sentences joined by a comma or by nothing. So I need to fix them. But in this case, it's just an ICDC, which is fine. So rather than rewriting it, you'll just put NA for those.